What a great day to celebrate, have this talk being the first official Florida Jimmy Buffett Day, right? First, we had our poet laureate for Key West, our former poet laureate, Tortuga Jack. Are you all familiar with Tortuga Jack? He has written a piece about Buffett, and we thought what better way to introduce this talk by one of our own coming up here and reading a piece that he wrote about Jimmy Buffett. And then I'll be back. I'll introduce Ryan, and we'll get this going.
Ooh-wee, so good to be, eh? Especially here in Key West for this Buffett buffet, featuring tasty licks, lyrics, spirits, and if you have Ryan's book, brilliance. I am Tortuga Jack. I am a performance poet, and I am going to perform this piece about Jimmy. And I met Jimmy in 1973 in Chicago while he was playing at a place called the Quiet Night. And he wanted to play at a place, my place. I was a saloon keeper. But he wanted to play right away. So I never did hire him, but I have a few tales about him. I'm going to forego those and jump right into this little piece, capturing what I hope is somewhat of the spirit that you realize about this particular individual. I call it Jimmy's Ditty, or my take on Buffett. Barroom ways, Margaritaville days, floating away on the sea. They all coexist down here in the Keys. A troubadour, he took note, sang about 'em to other folk. Soon, another lifestyle came to be. While wasted away, he brought fame to a cheeseburger in paradise. Blew out a flip-flop looking about for a lost shaker of salt. And his changes in attitude here in this latitude began to reign. Barroom ways, Margaritaville days, floating away on the sea. A pirate born just a bit too late, though still bounding towards an infamous fate, he swam through all the sharks, with fins to the left and fins to the right, and made it to the side, where he could bring his dreams to life. Dove real deep, always surfaced with the light, and I know, at least once in his life, he got this advice. Take it light, do it right. Enjoy. Yeah, take it light, do it right, enjoy. Barroom ways, Margaritaville days, floating away on the sea. Thank you very much.
So if you haven't seen him before, I usually catch him at the Green Parrot, not that I'm there often. But he reads poetry during Poetry Month there, and there's a lot of other great programs in town. And if you want to find out more, please ask Jack. Okay. I also want to thank Jill and Sean and the entire team for putting together Just a Few Friends this weekend, which she called and said, would you guys put something together, kind of like academic or nerdy? Okay, sure. So then I just cold emailed this guy and said, you don't know me, right? But would you come to Key West in August for this? And he's just been wonderful to work with. So I thank Jill and Sean for putting it together, and I thank Ryan for being here. Okay, this is what he offers. Once upon a time, Ryan White was twice named one of the top writers in the country by the Society for Features Journalism. He spent nearly 16 years at the Oregonian newspaper, covering sports, music, and culture. He's appeared here and there, including on the public radio show Live Wire, as both an essayist and an interviewer. the author of Jimmy Buffett, A Good Life All the Way, and Springsteen, album by album. He lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and currently spends his days at the same Detroit agency that once employed Elmore Leonard. That's all they have in common. Okay, I would love to welcome Ryan. Come on up here. Thanks.
So yeah, the thing that really threw me for a loop when Corey Cold emailed me was the request for an academic talk. I was like, I don't know what that is, and I don't think that I can learn between now and then. It was, this book came out in 2017, and so, obviously there is we all know why we're here this week, to remember Jimmy, to celebrate Jimmy, to keep the party going, as has become the rallying cry. And in spite of all that, I paused when Corey, reached out. It's a busy weekend. My daughter started high school the other day, and there's just a lot going on. And then I heard in the back of my head the voice of Tom Corcoran saying, "Go to Key West, kid. What the hell are you doing? Why are you pausing? Go to Key West." Tom died in January 2023. I don't think I have to introduce him to this room, but if you've read the book and you enjoyed the book, that's because of Tom. Tom was immensely generous with his time, with his knowledge, with his expertise, and he didn't have to be. I never asked him why. I think I was scared that he might realize that he was being as generous as he was and stop. So I thought about him a lot when I was working on this, and we'll see some of his photos. He is as responsible as anyone for cementing the idea of Jimmy Buffett, the iconography of Jimmy Buffett, the look, the feel of everything. And so with him in the back of my head, Corey reached out again and said, "I need a title." Great, there's a title. Some things never change, but most things do. The Enduring Magic of Margaritaville. Then I didn't do anything with the title for like a month and a half. And I sat down, I was like, oh shit. I'm stuck with this title. But that is really what the book was always about. So I want to start about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. I got an email from somebody right shortly after Jimmy died, and he just said, "Thank you for taking him seriously," which was nice. And I think what the world saw in those first couple of days was that Jimmy was one of one. Mac McAnally used to say on stage, "That's the real Jimmy Buffett, the one and only." And so when he died, there were Beatles and presidents and journalists and actors and pro sports teams in little shops in like way out of the way places that he would just frequent that were all celebrating him. If you go to the upper left corner there, that's Patterson Hood. He's the co-founder of this fantastic band called the Drive-By Truckers. His dad is David Hood, the bassist of the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. They founded Muscle Shoals Sound in the 60s there in North Alabama, and eventually moved it from a tiny little cinder block of a building where the Rolling Stones recorded Brown Sugar and Wild Horses to a bigger place over on the river where Jimmy recorded Coconut Telegraph. And Patterson had told me this story, but they were in Montreal. Drive-By Truckers playing a club, do sound check, go to dinner, and he just gets a call from an unknown number. Didn't answer it, because who answers an unknown number? Checks the voicemail, and it was Jimmy saying, "Hey, I'm here. Can I come to the show?" Patterson sets him up, sees him out the corner of his eye, kind of in disguise. Never comes backstage. Patterson was like, I hope he enjoyed it. But, constantly just crossing paths. So, you had Patterson. You had Kelly Slater, the surfer. Talked about Jimmy as a father figure. Pitbull, and if you like the song, that's awesome. I love liking anything you like. But Pitbull wrote one of the worst songs I've ever heard in tribute to Jimmy Buffett. He meant well, but it's a shit song. Buffett doesn't really rhyme with fuck it. Zach Brown, however, wrote a much, much better tribute song. Sheryl Crow, in one of the notes that I thought was, really summed things up best, just said, "I will miss knowing that he is on the planet." And, this book, when it came out in 2017, was marketed as a personal biography. Simon & Schuster knows more about marketing books than I do. I didn't fight it. I always saw it as a cultural biography. And the question that was at its core was this one: how do you change? Margaritaville was the 14th biggest hit of 1977. And then it grew up to become one of the most consequential songs ever. By the time this thing came out for the 40th anniversary, the closest analog to Margaritaville was not any other song, but it was a hit from 1977, Star Wars. It was an act of songwriting that turned into world building. And because of that, he probably never got the credit that he deserved as a songwriter. Not in this room. In this room, everybody knows. But in the big, broader cultural world. There's a lot of you have probably seen the documentary All That's Sacred on YouTube right now about the 70s down here. And Tom McGuane says this in the documentary. He goes, "I think Jimmy's penalized because he was so successful." And I thought that too when I started working on the book. I was, a lot of people asked when this came out, I was living in Oregon at the time, how the hell's a guy in Oregon end up writing a book about Jimmy Buffett? But I was a kid from Michigan who never went anywhere. And if we did, it was just down I-75 to see my uncle in Tampa, like twice a year for spring break. 2 days down, 3-4 days there, back up to the snow. That was all the travel I had. And in college, I met a buddy from Cincinnati. Yeah, you know. Oh, yeah. And so, he introduced me to Jimmy's music, and what captured me was, that sense of adventure, the sense of far away, the elsewhere that is in the music. And it took me places that I hadn't been, and so more than a drink or a cheeseburger or the hangover, I was really drawn to these, finely detailed little travel stories. And so there's this world where if Margaritaville doesn't hit, Jimmy Buffett has a career like John Prine, and he's thought about like John Prine. But Margaritaville did hit, and it did grow into this huge, huge thing. And so I wanted to chart that change. I think the best way to say it was in 2015, we were over at the Casa Marina for a meeting of the minds. Jimmy and the Coral Reefers were coming down, and they played all of White Sport Coat and a Pink Crustacean. And somebody asked me, "So what's the book about?" "It's about from here to there," I told him. I said, pointing in the direction of Louie's backyard, I said, "It's how do you get from there to right here and all of this?" Could you see what Margaritaville was from what it became? Some things never change. When I was going through Key West Citizens in the library from the 70s, there was a headline that just jumped out. It just said, "Wives sick of it." That doesn't change. But most things do. And when they do, how do you hold on to the essential parts of the past and the present, and then adapt to the times as they move forward? And I think somewhere I thought if I could figure that out for Margaritaville, I could figure it out for myself. I don't know that worked. But so why exactly has Margaritaville endured? That's not Jimmy Buffett. That's John D. McDonald. When this whole reporting journey started, one of the first things I did was I went to Lakeland to see Tom and spent a couple of days there. And then I drove to Gainesville to the University of Florida, where Jimmy had donated a bunch of papers to the University of Florida's Florida collection. And we're gonna We're going to see some of those later, 'cause there's a fascinating script to the Margaritaville movie that never got made, and a few other things. But John D. McDonald also donated a bunch of papers there, and when I finished going through all of Jimmy's stuff, I still had a couple hours until I had to hit the road to get to Mobile. So I started going through the John D. McDonald stuff. I love Travis McGee. Everybody loves Travis McGee. So you'll see there, it's about 215 miles from Sarasota to Fort Lauderdale. What's that say there? 3 hours and 8 minutes on whatever day I took that screenshot. So McDonald lived over in Sarasota. He put McGee on the busted flush over there at in Fort Lauderdale. And he was doing an interview in his 1979 with Motorboating and Sailing magazine. And they asked, why? Why did you set McGee so far from where you actually live? And McDonald said, I put him over there on the other side of the state on a hunch. I thought there might be a chance he would become popular. And if so, I certainly did not want my privacy compromised by having him live over here. I have been ever grateful. Not so with Margaritaville. This is from the testimony of James William Buffett, chairman of the board, Margaritaville Holdings, before the Nevada Gaming Control Board, March 7th, 2012. Member Burnett, how many planes do you own right now? Mr. Buffett, 4. A couple of 1 for business, 2 for business, and the other's just kind of fun. Member Reed, do you fly all those? Mr. Buffett, I fly a seaplane. I fly the jet. I fly a Pilatus. We don't have the big plane anymore. The plane that was involved in the Jamaica thing is on static display in Orlando at our restaurant. Member Burnett, my last question for you, sir. Looking at your corporate chart and the success that you have had with Margaritaville, and it clearly is extensive, I think you mentioned, or maybe your attorney mentioned, that you wrote the song in 1977. When you wrote that song, did you have any idea what it would become? Mr. Buffett, it's been a pretty good song. No, it was written in 5 minutes about a hot day in Austin, Texas, with a margarita and a beautiful woman. I finished it in Key West. I had no idea. So the Flamingo, where they had the casino's closed, and for a good long while, the Margaritaville Cafe there in the Flamingo was the highest grossing restaurant in the country. That closed a few months ago too. But I did a rough accounting the other day of what I came to call the Margaritaville Industrial Complex. There are, and this may have changed in the time that I'm standing here, 33 Margaritaville hotels and resorts. Another 11 are coming online soon. And they are categorized thusly: RV resort, cottage resort, resort casino, beach resort, lake resort, mountain resort, desert resort, all-inclusive resort, and city resort. Mountain hotel, beach hotel, city hotel, and boutique hotel. There are 5 luxury condominium developments and 4 55 and better communities. And as a copywriter who just turned 50, I tip my hat to whoever came up with 55 and better. That's well done. There are also 6 timeshare opportunities, and one presumes that operators are standing by. 2 cruise ships, 27 restaurants, 19 Land Shark Bar and Grills, 6 Air Margaritavilles, and 11 5 o'clock somewhere bars. There remains only 1 Key West. And in May 1971, a few months before Jimmy arrived alongside Jerry Jeff Walker and burst into the chart room where Tom Corcoran very famously handed him a beer, the Citizen was busy brainstorming what would seem unimaginable today. They were trying to figure out how to attract tourists. On May 7, 1971, the front page of the Key West Citizen featured news from the Monroe County Advertising Commission's most recent meeting at a restaurant up on Marathon. The commission has contracted for a billboard at Disney World, which will be located between the exhibition gate and the main gate. With that added to the mix, Monroe County had 40 billboards up throughout the state at a cost of $140 a month, 12-month lease, with an option to renew. In February 1971, peak season, Homestead, Florida had registered 7,204 visitors headed south on the overseas highway. That's for the whole month. A week after the story about the Billboard, another related story hit the Citizen. In the name of austerity, and for the next 90 days, the only purchases that Key West would make would be emergency purchases. This has always historically been a boom and bust town. It was busted at that particular point. Now, there are some benefits to that. There was room to breathe, and it was affordable. You know, in 1972, Vaughn Cochran came down from St. Augustine with a ceramics degree. He met another person with a ceramics degree. Find me a city anywhere with two ceramics degrees. And they started a business on the corner of Green and Duval. They rented the lot for $125 a month. You'd have to come down here with a hedge fund now to do that. Chris Robinson also came down from St. Augustine, got a job at the chart room, and just kind of marveled at the scene. He told me Key West was kind of run out of that bar in those days. The mayor was there, the police chief, the sheriff, the fire chief, the city attorney, the state attorney. You could get arrested, bonded, tried, and get a building permit. Cindy Thompson, who would become one of Margaritaville's first employees, was living in Colorado in the early 70s and wanted to get to the water. A friend mentioned Key West. She said, I didn't even know there were islands in the United States. But she tossed her backpack in her car, drove home to Wisconsin to see her family, and then pointed it south, like so many millions of Midwesterners since. And she said, I couldn't believe it when I got here. It was magical. Her husband, Steve, had come from Seattle. It was so quiet, he said. You know, and those days have been very well covered in my book and other books, most especially in the songs, you know, by Jimmy and the poems of Jim Harrison and the novels of Tom McGuane. That it was a moment with a capital M, and it burned bright, and then it burned out pretty quickly. Those 7,000 visitors in February '71. From 74 to 78, Air Sunshine, operating a fleet of DC-3s and Corvair 440s from Miami and Tampa to the Keys. In 76, so just 5 years later, they brought 112,000 passengers in and out of the Keys, and 76 was double what it did in 75. For Christmas 76, every hotel was so full, the Chamber of Commerce turned to people who had agreed to rent their places out to tourists. Like, Key West invented Airbnb. You know, hotels, you know, reported to the citizens that reported to the Citizen that the heaviest traffic seemed to be from the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois specifically, with a noticeable increase in visitors from Europe and South America. In 77, Tom said he saw spring breakers. By 79, families were strolling down Duval Street. In the first quarter of this year, in the first 3 months, 600,000 people flew into Key West International. And that's just flying. Like this, I flew in yesterday. That was the first time I've ever flown in here. I've been coming here for 30 years. I just like to drive. But so you take 600,000, you divide that by 90 days, you add the people by, add in all the people coming in by cruise ship or by car, and it is a very different place. I could see it changing from the funky little town I loved into something touristy, Jimmy told Rolling Stone in a 1977 quote we're going to come back to. But now we get to talk about the song. That is the lyrics on the music stand in the studio. That is one of Tom's photos. He ran me off a copy and sent it to me. I don't have the actual photo, but I don't know. It does okay. Chorus with girls. The funny thing about Margaritaville, to me, is that it's kind of a sad song, lyrically anyways. It's actually my favorite kind of song, the happy-sounding sad song. It gives voice to someone who is disillusioned at best and falling apart at worst. Had he stayed in one place too long? Did he have anything to show for that time? Anything other than that tattoo, and where the hell did that come from? Had he accomplished anything at all? And if he hadn't accomplished anything, who was to blame? Certainly not him. And when things go wrong, doesn't it always seem like they just spiral into like tiny indignities? You know, everything else sucks, and now you blow out your flip-flop and cut your foot on a pop top, you know. And it needs to be said that he was probably drinking too much, this man in this song. If we had a friend like that, we'd try to help. You know, in the real world, the one that lived off the page, Jimmy had had one minor hit, Come Monday. It had given him a taste of what could be. But that was in '74. 2 albums had come and gone without a follow-up. And with a lot of miles traveling, touring, and working exceptionally hard. You know, I don't think, you know, I go to a lot of concerts. A lot of people here probably go to a lot of concerts. I don't think any of us really understand what touring is like, especially at a level where you're playing clubs. It's exhausting. I was talking to Janet Weiss one time, who used to be the drummer in a band Slater Kinney. She goes, yeah, everybody thinks it's really glamorous, but right now I'm sitting on a couch backstage wondering if it has bed bugs. So, and that was at a good club. It was like the 930 Club in D.C. So he was working and just wasn't quite there. And this place, this little haven that he had found, was changing before his eyes into something else. And so he packed all of that into this perfect little vignette in, you know, this sunny-sounding song that he described to producer Norbert Putnam as being about a day and night in Key West. And he told that to Norbert, and Norbert went, well, that doesn't sound like much of a song. And, you know, Norbert told me that he was really hoping that Jimmy would just kind of forget about it and that they wouldn't get around to recording it. And after 3 or 4 days in the studio, they got around to recording it. And Jimmy played him the whole thing through, and then he got it. He heard the conflict within the character. And, you know, any good story has to have conflict. So Norbert was sold. They cut it in the studio up in Miami, Criterion Sound, and they cut out one verse. Old men in tank tops, cruising the gift shops, checking out Chiquitas down by the shore. They dream about weight loss, wish they could be their own boss. Those 3-day vacations become such a bore. Now, it's become known as the Lost Verse, and it wasn't lost very long. It came out in '78 on the live album. You had to be there. But it remains fascinating, especially from our seat here amidst everything that Margaritaville became. Now, you can't quantify this. There's no math or economist that I could call to try and sort this stuff out. But I will stand on Townes Van Zant's coffee table in Bob Dylan's boots, or whatever the Steve Earle quote was, and say that that is the most profitable edit in the history of popular music. Because in a world where those same men, and I am one of them, are being asked to buy expensive blenders and book vacations and 3-day cruises, you know, it's a little sneering. And I will note, if you have not seen the South Park episode where they use the frozen concoction maker to explain the entire mechanism of the 2008 financial crisis, it's really good. I had the benefit of telling the John Colin, the CEO of Margaritaville, that it existed. I was like, what do you mean you haven't seen this? It's your premier product, and you're in finance. It should be in your wheelhouse. So, edit made, Margaritaville cracked Billboard's Top 100 in February '77, and then began a slow, successful climb through a long, hot summer, the summer of Star Wars and the summer of The Son of Sam. It crept into the top 50 by the end of April, and on May 21st, while Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke held the top spot, it broke into the top 30, which meant it was bigger than Come Monday. Casey and the Sunshine Band's I'm Your Boogeyman was number 1 in June when Margaritaville cracked the top 20. In July, it made it into the top 10, peaking at number 8. The top spots during that time went to Sean Cassidy's saccharine cover of the Crystals' Da-Do Run Run, Barry Manilow's saccharine Looks Like We Made It, and Andy Gibbs' saccharine Just Want to Be Your Everything. There are your lost shakers of salt, possibly. Buffett and the Coral Reefers played Central Park that summer, and by the time they rolled into North Carolina, you could see what was building. The marquee said, "Welcome to Margaritaville." So it grew to be the song of every summer, a stadium anthem, an arena anthem, a standard wherever there is water and a speaker. I was in Ludington, Michigan in June, a sweet little town up on Lake Michigan. Walked into a rooftop bar and they had a Conch Republic flag flying. That's Jimmy. Jimmy invented that. That doesn't get all the way up there without him. In April 2023, the Library of Congress inducted Margaritaville into the National Recording Registry, a collection built to preserve songs for generations to come. And in a few months, Jimmy's going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was not a thing, not an institution that seemed particularly friendly to him until he passed, which, it's not the death of an unpopular poet. He was wildly, wildly popular, but the plot line rings true. And if margaritas weren't the drink of choice in the 70s around here, and they weren't, look now. Tom, writing in Crawdaddy in 1977, maybe 4 people actually wore flowers in their hair before Scott McKenzie sang San Francisco. Afterward, the place looked like a botanical exhibit. Now, people are drinking margaritas like it's been a tradition. So we took a look around there in 77. Think about the last 4 decades. Everything that has changed. Television went from 3 networks to cable to more streaming services than we can possibly keep track of. Pop music was played on AM radio in the 50s when Jimmy was growing up. Gave way to FM in the 70s when Margaritaville was hitting. MTV drove the 80s and 90s. And then internet and satellite radio took hold. Radio Margaritaville and Jimmy surfed those last 2 especially well. He was so far ahead of his time in terms of figuring out new technologies while everybody else the record industry was still fighting everything. He made it work. Formats, we went from records to 8-tracks to cassettes to CDs to streaming. Genres, folk and rock, disco, punk, glam, pop rock, hard rock, heavy metal, hair metal, grunge, emo, techno, more pop, more rock, and whatever is dominating TikTok right now that has probably changed in between punctuating stabs of this pen. Country music went from the Nashville sound that Chet Atkins used to describe by jingling the change in his pocket. What's it sound like? It sounds like money. To pop country, to a type of country music so heavily influenced by Jimmy Buffett that everybody was trying to get Jimmy Buffett on their songs. And he had never fit into Nashville when he was there before he moved to Key West. And speaking of Nashville, in the wake of Bob Dylan doing Nashville Skyline in the late 60s, a singer-songwriter brand of countryish folk rose up. Buffett was very much a part of that, along with people like Guy Clark and John Prine and just so many great, great writers. That sort of alt-folk electrified into alt-country, which led to Americana. Todd Snyder, who Jimmy signed to to Margaritaville Records in the early 90s, likes to joke that that Americana is just unsuccessful country music. Except now there's a bunch of people that are really successful at it. You think about Jason Isbell. The new record by Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings, which if you haven't listened to it, I would highly recommend it, is called Woodland, because they own Woodland Studios, which is where Jimmy recorded Living and Dying in 3/4 Time and A1A, which as of today is the Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway. So, the internet blew up, changed everything. But one of the things that it has really done is it allowed artists to go more directly to their fans. Jimmy figured that out in '85 when he started the Coconut Telegraph newsletter. Just for fun, I looked this up. There were 4.2 billion people on the planet when Margaritaville was released. There are 8 billion now. Dogs and cats getting along? I got one better for you. Snoop Dogg went from being a truly dangerous figure to hosting the Olympics alongside Martha Stewart, and she's the only one of the 2 of them that's been to jail. Selling out used to be bad. Now nobody cares. So yeah, change is everywhere all the time, and it is inevitable. It is often slow, and I think that's especially true with personal change. You know, there's always this period of conflict where you're trying to reconcile some earlier version of yourself, some earlier belief, with the future that you see coming over the horizon. Like, how does this make sense? And I hate to say it, and I hate to inject this word at all, or this phrase at all into this talk, but I think those wrestling, that wrestling match internally is called growing up. Yeah, I'm not happy about it either. In a 1976 interview, this was maybe my favorite quote that I found working on the book. In a 1976 interview with High Times magazine, Jimmy said, "As long as I can do this, and as long as I know that I'm doing it, I'm going to be content at a certain level. I'm not going to go out there and try to sell my lifestyle to America, because they ain't going to buy it. They never have." 6 years later, his lawyers began a multi-year litigation process before the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, working to oppose a Mexican restaurant chain's attempt to trademark Margaritaville for their own margarita promotions, specifically on Tuesdays. Taco Tuesday was right there for them at that point, but no. Most of the paperwork that still exists from that case is pretty standard legalese. There's some passive-aggressive sniping, a lot of billable hours, so many billable hours, and a few genuinely funny passages. Both, I think they would have been funny in the moment, but they're especially funny with the benefit of knowing how this story ends. This was from a February 1985 filing by Chi-Chi's. "Opposer has taken great pains to allege as its primary case that 1, Margaritaville is the name of a song, and 2, Jimmy Buffett," they spelled his name wrong, "is a popular singer, and 3, that Jimmy Buffett has sold many records with the song Margaritaville on it. Even if we accept these allegations as fact." Yes, even if. Also from Chi-Chi's. "An equally absurd claim to the rights in gross arises from opposers' claim that restaurant services are somehow a natural field of expansion for entities which publish music. If a nexus exists between songs and restaurants, opposer could claim an equal nexus between songs and the tangible items of the universe." That's prophecy. That's also the Margaritaville pet swim vest. Well, we have cats. There's no way you're getting a cat into that thing. As part of the proceedings, Irving Azoff was deposed. Formerly Jimmy's manager, he was at the time the president of MCA Records. "I think that it is very important to Jimmy's continued success to control the name Margaritaville," he said. "I think Jimmy Buffett is more entitled to connect himself to the word Margaritaville than any other artist of any other song that I have known," he said. But he also said this, "And I really believe, know, and think that a chain of restaurants called Margaritaville, for instance, if they were big, neon, electronic, computerized restaurants, could damage Jimmy's ability to make money in the future because it would hurt his image." 2 out of 3 ain't bad there. But in 1984, Jimmy, he did license Margaritaville to a couple of guys in Gulf Shores, Alabama. They opened a place called JB's Margaritaville. Jimmy played there. That photo is one of the brothers who founded it sent me that. That was after Jimmy and Fingers went down and played. The place also had a mini golf course that they called the Gulf of Mexico. And one of them is an attorney, and to this day, he can't believe they let that many drunk people have putters. In 85, the Margaritaville store opened here. And then in 1987, there was a finished first draft of a script for Margaritaville the movie. A love triangle adrift in the Bermuda Triangle. Margaritaville is about 2 guys from different worlds who become great buddies as they, 1, travel from island to island in the Caribbean, having adventures and meeting various eccentrics. 2, resolve their comic love triangle with a beautiful girl, and 3, save the island of Margaritaville and the way of life it symbolizes from the forces of greed and hypocrisy. The script fades in on wide open spaces, day. A vast windswept plain stretches to the horizon. In the distance, we see a lone horseman, James Delaney. It could be 1887, but it's not, as we will soon learn from the narrator, a woman who speaks with a Caribbean patois. I'm going to apologize now for my accent here. I shouldn't be allowed to do it, and it seems like the kind of thing that could get one canceled. But James Delaney, he got the big problem. He be vacantly occupied. See, he be a good enough buckaroo. And then it goes into a montage that features boat drinks, cowboy in the jungle, and migration. And if you think you know where the story goes from there, you're right. He makes his way to the island of Margaritaville, entering the town square where there's a mini-mart, a tattoo parlor, a cheeseburger and paradise cafe, and an old tire swing. Eventually, he encounters the owner of Margaritaville's hotel, a former smuggler named Frank Bama. You can see the second page there was the script record. It got sent to both Harrison Ford and Robert Redford. I'm figuring Harrison Ford for the Frank Bama part and Redford for the cowboy out of sorts. I've not figured out who they would have cast in the female role named Lola, who we will get to right now. So a cruise ship docks, all the locals rush out and they quadruple the prices on everything. Lola arrives. The mayor is known as Mayor Bubba, and there's an evil developer named Carlos Voltaire. The son of Pinky Voltaire and the grandson of old Billy Voltaire, the man who first bring the good economic conditions to the island. But poor Carlos, he born with the bad case of the third generation poorlies. His granddaddy be greedy and clever. Then his daddy be stupid and lazy. Carlos, he get the bad genes from both and come out the worst combination of the two, greedy and stupid. Adventure and misadventure ensue. Excuse me. Carlos opens a new club called the Flaming Clam, and he plans on a big, shiny hotel. The script is like, you can see why it didn't get made. It feels like it's got a lot of hands on it, but what makes it really interesting is a lot of the pieces of it would work their way into other things, and it was the first real kind of full-throated shot at kind of an extended Margaritaville cinematic universe. And kind of funny, on page 21, Delaney rents an old beach shack, and he's cleaning it up, and he finds a trap door in the floor. He opens it up, and he finds a large ceramic salt shaker. The salt shaker is actually a figurine, a statuette of a Mexican cutie. It's a little heavy-handed, but you could see where it was working towards. You know, Frank Bama would end up starring in Where is Joe Merchant. Delaney would become Tolly Mars when Tales from Margaritaville came out, and that thing stayed on the bestseller list forever. You know, and then the empire just really started to grow in the 90s. Did Jimmy's Crowds after, you know, a bit of a lull. He had a nice touring career through the 80s, but it was nothing like what it would become, you know, and he embraced all of those new and emerging technologies. I am certain someone at some point told him it was a terrible idea to broadcast your concerts live on the internet. That person would never admit it now because it was a wildly good idea, especially when you're trying to sell blenders. Come on over, I got a blender. We'll listen to the show on the internet. It'd be great. So one answer to how he cut his course through all of those decades and all of that change is that he simply understood himself, he understood his audience, and he trusted both of those things. You know, and by doing that, the world eventually caught up to him and then caught on to him. So we began this, I missed a slide in there. Look at that, more script. Sorry about that. So we began with billboards, that kind of roadside cry for attention that this country is best known for. Like, come on down here, please, pretty please. And Key West was never going to stay hidden. It was never going to be quiet. It was never going to stay cheap and wild in that particular way that attracted those people that, we celebrate there from the early 70s. And that was true before, Jimmy arrived and made his name and wrote Margaritaville. And it's true today in that All That Is Sacred documentary, Carl Hyson says, we do tend to stampede the last great places that we love so much. And we do. I don't think, I don't think this could, Key West in the early 70s could exist today. There would be just busloads of influencers here 10 minutes after the first person said, hey, this is nice. But, Chris Robinson, who we mentioned having come down from St. Augustine, we were sitting on the beach in 2015, and he goes, when I got here in 71, there were people who said, oh, you should have been here in 51. So we're always late, at least according to somebody else's clock. And everybody's remember when is just a little different. Still, there's no question that Margaritaville and Jimmy Buffett did more for Key West specifically and the beach in general than all those billboards, brochures, or any website. And he knew that. And he knew that before anybody else did, too. The full quote from Rolling Stone in 77, after being specifically asked about the lost verse, was, I could see it changing from the funky little town that I loved into something touristy. I was thinking, was I a part of that? So I was trying to justify it to myself. So everything changes. Some things last. Why has Margaritaville been one of those? My wife will sometimes accuse me of spring-splaining. This is when I use something Bruce Springsteen has said or sung to punctuate a point. You can do it with Buffett stuff, too. It just doesn't have a name that rolls off the tongue like spring-splaining. Bruce, he wrote about this in his memoir, and he's talked about it in some interviews since. And it's the magic trick that especially talented musicians perform on a nightly basis. You're there to manifest something, he says. Before you go in there, it's an empty room. It's an empty building. So the audience is going to come, and you're going to show up, and together you're going to manifest something that's very, very real, that's very tangible, but you're going to pull it out of thin air. In that way, Margaritaville is so much more than a state of mind. Jimmy took a little bit from a special time in this special place here at the end of the road, the last American exit, and he and his band and his fans made it real. All three of them together, all three of those things. Every time they stepped on stage, every time folks got together, be that at a show in their backyards with their parrot head clubs, whatever they're doing, they made Margaritaville real. It is a singular song because he is a singular person. I was talking to Will Kimbrough a couple of months ago, and hopefully, probably many of you will see him on Sunday when he's playing down here. And we were talking about the recording of Equal Strain on All Parts, and the band was in the studio for a couple of days before Jimmy arrived. Will thought he was probably at treatment. And they were great working sessions. They're such a great band, and they all knew each other, and it was fun, and it was good. But the mood changed when Jimmy arrived. Everything got amped up. Will said, he goes, it just became Jimmy World. It was more fun. It was, no less work. Jimmy walked in the studio, looked at Will, and said, hey, we got to go upstairs and work on lyrics. And that was when they finished Bubbles Up. So he had that effect in a room. He had that effect in an arena. He had that effect in a stadium. He had that effect on the culture. In August 2022, look at that, my wife and I were in Maine celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. Tuesday morning, we got up, we went for a hike, and then we decided to drive to Bangor to look around. Ducked into a brew pub. They had a taco and margarita special. My wife tried to order it, and the waitress goes, oh, no, we don't have that today. There's some show in town. The hell show is in town where you don't have a taco and margarita special? So before she could even ask that question, I had the answer on my phone. Jimmy was there. I had not looked at the tour schedule at all. And my wife goes, well, we kind of got to go, don't we? I was like, well, yeah, we got to go. We didn't even have to move the car. It was a half mile from where we were sitting. StubHub came through with some pretty good seats for under $30. Then, like, I don't know, $90 in service charges. God, hate them. And so we spent the rest of the day just kind of ducking into bars and bookshops and walking around town. She had never seen Jimmy. I will tell you, she did not particularly like Jimmy. She liked him less after I spent 2 years traveling all over the country and listening to him constantly. She looked at me at one point and said, I'm not doing the Finns thing. She did the Finns thing. I got a really crap photo of it, or it would be up on the screen right now, and she'd kill me when she sees this video. Before the doors to the venue opened, this huge thunderstorm rolls through. Like, a bunch of us were hiding under the deck of a brew pub because there was no room left in the brew pub. Like, peanut shells were just like dropping on our heads and stuff. But skies cleared, rainbow came out, and the show was great. It was just a ton of fun. When I first started thinking about the book, I went up to Seattle because I hadn't seen him in 7 or 8 years, and I just was like, is it still as fun as I remember? Because if it's not, I don't want to work on this thing. That show was as fun as I remembered. They were always fun. And so he was closing with Defying Gravity, and I nudged my wife and pointed her towards the exit. I had this feeling that I maybe wouldn't see another show. Not for health reasons, not for anything like that, but as mentioned earlier, I have a teenager now, and the concert budget is severely dented by Taylor Swift. And lately, Noah Kahn, who seems to be trying to do for Vermont what Jimmy did for Key West. My daughter the other day was just like, "Oh my God, we have to go to Vermont to see the leaves change." I was like, "We don't, though." Everything about Jimmy's career and Margaritaville defied gravity. A guy with one top 10 hit in the 70s should have been playing state fairs by the 80s. Instead, he cultivated a community, and he turned that into something that we generally lack in this country: an escape, a way out of the grind, a break. The French take August off. We had Jimmy Buffett. He always referred to himself as a court jester, but he was an illusionist, I think, too, or maybe a hypnotist. He could make you think you were somewhere else. And so he sang the final notes of that Jesse Winchester song. We hit the gate, and it rang out, and I turned to my wife and I said, "What did you think?" She goes, "He was really charming." Because he was so charming. And he was one of one. That's Margaritaville. Thank you. I've always loved that photo. Tom told me that photo was they were in the Bahamas, and that was the night after Jimmy had called the record company and to just check in, and they told him that Margaritaville was getting traction and he needed to get on the road. They chartered a King Air and got out of the Bahamas, and he basically toured ever since. Thank you.